The screen in the Combat Information Center flashed a warning that no sailor ever wants to see during a routine transit. Possible launch indication. At 5:28 local time, the air on the bridge of the U.S. Navy escort turned to ice as 4 Iranian missile boats completed a lethal bracket maneuver, pinning the massive warship into a tactical corner. There was no shouting and no panic, just the rhythmic breathing of a crew staring down the barrels of a potential international incident. The lead boat had just refined its angle, its bow cutting through the steel-gray water with a terrifying level of commitment. The trap was set, and the next few seconds would determine if this was a bluff or the start of a hot war. It all started at 5:17 in the morning under a flat black sky. 4 fast surface contacts suddenly broke formation, turning their bows directly toward the U.S. carrier escort, with a sudden surge in speed. On the bridge, the silence lasted for exactly half a second before the CIC reported the bearing change. These weren't fishing vessels or merchant traffic wandering off course. They were small, low-profile silhouettes rising and falling through the chop, their wakes sharpening behind them like white blades. The officer of the deck leaned over the repeater, his voice steady as he asked for a classification. The answer that came back changed the atmosphere instantly. Probable Iranian fast missile boats. The captain arrived on the bridge in seconds, buttoning his jacket while his eyes swept the tactical displays. He didn't need a briefing because he could read the geometry of the intercept at a single glance. The 4 boats were no longer moving parallel to the escort. They were converging, tightening a circle that left the American ship with fewer and fewer options. Current CPA was under 4 nautical miles and falling fast. The captain's first order was calm and professional. Log everything and hail them. The radio operator opened the circuit, broadcasting a clear warning in English over the bridge-to-bridge frequency. Unidentified Iranian vessels, you are approaching at an unsafe speed. Alter course immediately. There was no answer from the Iranian side, only the sight of those 4 white wakes growing longer and harder against the dawn horizon. On a warship, every movement is a message, and the captain chose to send a message of absolute discipline by holding his course and speed. He kept his voice low, ordering the weapons to stay tight and forbidding any illumination unless specifically ordered. Below the bridge, the ship was silently transforming. Consoles in the CIC brightened as electronic warfare operators began recording emissions and fire control solutions moved into standby. The systems were waking up, but they remained invisible to the untrained eye, waiting for the provocation to cross the line into an overt act. By 5:19, the Iranian tactics became even more aggressive as the 4 boats split into pairs. 2 angled wide to the starboard side, while 1 stayed centered, and the 4th accelerated hardest of all, pushing ahead with a confidence that suggested a predetermined plan. The lead boat was now hitting 28 knots, its narrow profile showing an aggressive bow rise under heavy throttle. This wasn't an observation run or a casual intercept. This was a high-speed run intended to force a reaction. The captain watched through his binoculars, noting the stripped-down, purposeful decks. He ordered a second warning, informing the Iranians they were at an unsafe range, but the silence on the radio continued to hang heavy. As the dawn light filled the bridge windows, the hard lines of steel replaced the dark shapes on the horizon. The optics team began calling out external features, identifying masts and forward deck configurations that left no room for national ambiguity. The Iranians were building a classic bracket setup, with 1 boat drawing attention forward while others pressed the flank, waiting for the geometry to tighten into a box. The captain lowered his binoculars and brought the helicopter detachment to immediate standby. He didn't want it airborne yet, just ready to launch at a moment's notice. He was playing a game of tactical chess where every move was being recorded by infrared systems and long-range optics. At 5:21, the tension spiked when the electronic warfare operator reported intermittent surface search emissions from the lead Iranian group. They were painting the U.S. ship with radar, refining their picture of the target. The captain's response was a chillingly calm, "Not yet," when asked about fire control. The range dropped to 11 nautical miles, then 10.5. The lead boat surged again, its wake flattening into a white spear aimed directly at the escort's bow. The pattern was unmistakable now, a coordinated, controlled approach designed to overload the decision cycle of the American bridge crew. They wanted the U.S. Navy to blink first, to turn away and hand them a propaganda victory on the high seas. The captain ordered the ship to set Condition 3, bringing additional watch teams to key stations. Weapons crews reported ready status, and decoy systems were checked as the forward gun mount sloughed a few degrees. It wasn't an aggressive move, just a deliberate signal to the Iranians that the ship was awake and watching. Aft, the helicopter's rotor blades began to turn, chopping the morning air into rhythmic beats that the Iranian crews would certainly hear over the roar of their own engines. The message from the American ship was clear: we see you, we are not surprised, and the next move is yours. The range was now falling through 10 miles, turning this into a short fuse situation. At 5:24, the starboard pair of Iranian boats shifted their weight, pressing in from the flank in a clear containment maneuver. The captain stepped closer to the tactical display, watching as the bracket nearly finished its formation. One boat threatened the bow, two squeezed the side, and the last lingered behind to preserve spacing and options. The officer of the deck noted that they wanted the US ship to react, but the captain's response was firm. He wouldn't give them panic, he would give them procedure. He ordered another hail in maritime warning format, reminding the Iranian craft that their actions were being recorded and that they needed to change course to avoid an escalation. The reply finally came, but it was just a burst of broken, clipped radio noise that offered no cooperation. At 5:25, the helicopter lifted off the deck, sliding forward over the escort's starboard side to provide a bird's-eye view of the threat. The live video feed from the Hilo showed the Iranian boats carving through the gray water, their hulls riding high under acceleration. From above, the coordinated posture looked even more sinister. The aircrew reported visible deck activity on the lead boat, with personnel moving near the forward section. The sensor operator zoomed in, his voice tightening as he reported a possible canister alignment. For the first time, the danger had a physical, metallic shape. The report of a possible missile posture hit the bridge like a physical weight. If the canisters were aligned, the Iranians weren't just crowding the escort anymore, they were preparing for a strike. The captain remained emotionless, reminding his crew to stay inside the rules of engagement until the line was actually crossed. But that line was becoming paper thin. At 5:26, the electronic warfare station reported that the lead contact's emissions were becoming tighter and more focused. They were no longer just tracking the ship's presence, they were refining a targeting solution. The helicopter pilot confirmed that the Iranians were scanning both the ship and the aircraft, effectively doubling their provocation. The lead boat was now hitting 31 knots, its wake a hard spear of foam. Inside the US ship, every compartment felt the rising pressure. Damage control teams waited in full kit below decks, and countermeasures were on standby. No one was guessing what would happen next. They were simply preparing for the worst-case scenario. The bracket was tightening to a point where the decision window was measured in seconds. The Iranian boats were trying to force a mistake, hoping the US ship would make a move that could be characterized as a retreat. But the captain had other plans, watching the tactical display for the exact moment when the Iranian geometry would become vulnerable. At 5:28, the situation reached its breaking point. The helicopter sensor operator called out a possible launcher exposure on the lead contact. The bridge went dead quiet as the lead boat snapped a few degrees farther across the escort's bow, while the two boats to starboard surged inward like white claws. It was a perfectly timed, multi-axis approach designed to paralyze the American response. The Iranian crews were committed, their boats rolling heavily through the chop as they pushed for the final alignment. This was the moment of maximum provocation, the point where most people would have flinched. But instead of turning away, the American captain prepared to stand his ground. Right full rudder, come 5 degrees to starboard. The captain's order was a masterpiece of tactical restraint. It wasn't a retreat, and it wasn't a turn away from the threat. It was a sharp, controlled repositioning that stepped the ship's track across the water like a piece on a chessboard. As the escort's bow began to swing, the entire Iranian plan started to unravel in real time. The lead boat, which had been driving toward a clean crossing line, suddenly found its angle collapsing. The direct approach window for the centered contact disappeared, and one of the starboard boats had to correct so hard it nearly overshot its own turning arc. The bracket was dead. The shift was subtle but devastating to the Iranian formation. Their spacing broke instantly, and the synchronization that had made them so dangerous just seconds ago was gone. The helicopter seized the moment, dropping lower and faster over the formation. The rotor wash lashed the sea into a white spray, hitting the Iranian boats at exactly the wrong time. The aircrew reported that the second contact was already checking its speed, its aggression replaced by the need to avoid a collision. The US escort's bow kept coming around, and by the time it steadied on its new line, the lead Iranian boat found itself isolated and exposed, right in the crosshairs of every sensor on the American ship. The captain didn't let up. He took the radio handset himself and delivered a final message, informing the Iranian vessels that they had been recorded conducting unsafe armed maneuvers. He demanded they alter course immediately and open the distance. This time, the silence was broken by agitated bursts of Farsi. The tone on the radio was no longer confident, it was clipped and frantic. From the helicopter's view, the lead boat finally broke left, followed quickly by the second. The third and fourth boats began to slow down, their formation dissolving into a group of individual craft looking for a way out of the trap they had tried to set. The pressure had officially reversed. Even as 3 of the boats pulled away, one remained stubborn. The fourth Iranian craft lingered just outside the broken formation, its bow still canted toward the US ship, as if its crew couldn't decide whether to retreat or try one last act of defiance. The captain kept his gaze hardened on that lone boat, ordering the crew to maintain surveillance. He knew that the last mistake at sea often happens after people think the crisis is over. The helicopter circled wide, keeping its camera locked on the indecisive vessel. On the live feed, the Iranian deck crew looked less coordinated, moving without the purpose they had shown during the initial high-speed run. Finally, after 10 seconds that felt like an eternity, the fourth boat's bow began to slide away. It committed to the turn, opening water and increasing its separation from the US escort. The captain didn't cheer, and neither did his crew. They simply watched through the glass until the retreat was undeniable. He ordered the ship to maintain Condition 3 and ensured that every log, sensor file, and frame of helicopter footage was backed up and preserved. The encounter was over, not because of a single shot, but because the US Navy had stayed inside the Iranian decision cycle longer than the provocateurs could handle. The ship had stood its ground. The larger carrier group continued its transit through the haze, steady and unbroken, serving as a silent backdrop to the failed provocation. The Iranians had rushed the escort, tried to trap it, and failed because the American ship refused to flinch. In the aftermath, the forward gun mount eased off its angle, and the damage control teams were finally stood down. Sailors on watch kept their binoculars trained on the 4 shapes as they faded into the distance, returning to the ordinary traffic patterns of the morning. It was a victory of discipline over drama, a reminder that on the high seas, the most powerful weapon is often a steady hand on the rudder. The tactical lesson of the morning was clear. Naval confrontations aren't won by whoever moves first, but by whoever maintains control the longest. The Iranians had forced the geometry, but the Americans had controlled the outcome. By 5:34, the range had opened significantly, and the helicopter began its return leg to the ship. The sea was calm again, but the data recorded in those 17 minutes would be studied for years. Every emission spike and course change was now a permanent part of the record. The U.S. escort hadn't chased the boats or overreacted. It had simply reset the fight on its own terms and made the aggressors look amateurish. As the sun finally cleared the horizon, the carrier group remained on its original course, its formation intact and its mission unchanged. Behind it, 4 Iranian missile boats were shrinking into dots on the water. They had come looking for a fight, or at least a moment of American weakness they could exploit, but they found a wall of professional restraint. Their message had been sent, but the answer they received was one that every navy in the region would understand perfectly. You can provoke, you can threaten, and you can build your brackets, but a disciplined crew will always find the 5 degrees of space they need to break your plan. It makes you wonder if the Iranian crews realized how close they came to a disaster, or if they were simply following orders to see how far the Americans would let them go. Out here, the margin for error is non-existent, and a single panic decision could have changed the history of the region in a heartbeat. The ship's memory was now assembled frame by frame, ready to be used as evidence in the second battle that always follows these encounters, the battle for the narrative. But for the men and women on that bridge, the only narrative that mattered was that they were still on course and their ship was safe. So, did the Iranian Navy truly miscalculate the resolve of the escort, or was this a calculated test to see exactly where the red line is drawn? The sea has a way of exposing the truth, and on this morning, the truth was that discipline is the ultimate counter to provocation. If you want to see more of these high-stakes naval standoffs where a single decision can lead to total disaster, make sure to subscribe and stay tuned. Let us know your take in the comments. Because in the world of modern naval warfare, the most dangerous moment isn't always the explosion, it's the silence right before someone decides not to blink.